They built a garden for 1986 for Expo, and I think that was the name they came up with because they were trying to build bridges between China and Canada, because Canada and Vancouver is so multicultural. And when we were doing Expo, they represented Canada, but this is the first international authentic Chinese garden outside of China. It was built 20 years ago here in 1986. And I think they called it Dr. Sun Yat-Sen because he stayed across the street. And you know, the parking lot, this is the area the hotel was.
After finding out why the gardens were built in Vancouver, I carried out further interviews to determine if the garden was indeed helping Chinese integrate into Western society or improving people's cultural understanding.
The garden itself, though, has never been solely a Chinese organization. We've always been, I'd say, 50-50. We serve as a bridge, and the bridge has 2 feet. So we have one, you know, in the Asian culture, and we have one in Vancouver's culture. And that's very important to us. Although we are important to the Chinese community, I think we're equally as important to the Vancouver community at large. When the Chinese people first came here, Canadians didn't want them to integrate. They weren't welcome, really. I mean, they were welcome to come and do the work, but they certainly didn't want, you know, the Chinese people in any of the neighborhoods. Or there was one that I know of, a big riot here, where they trashed some stores in Chinatown, you know, the mainstream folks, and it was because they were afraid that the Chinese people were taking their jobs. So it, in an odd way, it was a refuge for the Chinese people who really weren't welcome very, very much. It's taken a long time. It does usually for most immigrant populations when they come in. They often enclave. They're looking for the food they want. It's pretty tough to, you know, speak another language right away. So you just need that comfort. We're more open as a society now, so new people coming in don't feel like they have to, you know, mob together for safety also. But back then, yeah.
It is clear that Kathy believes the garden plays an important role in bringing together Chinese and Canadian culture. But what about immigrants? Do they feel the same way? I interviewed 2 Chinese immigrants who have just recently arrived in Vancouver and got their opinions on the garden.
What brought you to the Sun Yat-Sen Gardens today?
I heard about that in Taiwan, and I'm so curious that how come there's a so traditional garden in the Western world, so I wanted to take a look at it and see how it is. It's just like the one I saw on picture, and it's very traditional. And yeah, I think it's quite good to, they have a place in Vancouver, so Chinese style. Vancouver people or people from all over the world, they came to Vancouver and then they can see a traditional garden, just like those in China or in Taiwan.
We have a place to come and to, you know, just kind of reminds of our culture, and also probably gives some points for people who are interested in Chinese culture, that can, you know, they have place to learn and to see the culture. It is good to have some place like, you know, the garden to, you know, make me feel comfortable, you know, make me feel like familiar with all the environment. When I first settled down here, it helped me to feel comfortable whenever I come here, and also it helped people to learn our culture, and also help the Canadian history and Chinese culture to learn each other both. Yeah, so I think that's really a good idea to have the garden. I'm really happy to have that.
Chinese culture here, it is important because it's sort of meant to bridge the gap between Chinese and Western culture. Because I know that when it was first started, I remember, well, not then, but I remember reading recently that not only the Canadian government but the Chinese government put some funds into the project here in an attempt to sort of, you know, make a bridge between the 2 countries and the 2 cultures.
And do you think it's worked?
I think it's worked a little bit because I know that in school, you know, people go to field trips there, and these would be, you know, schools where majority of students would be Vancouver students, you know, like Caucasian students as well, that type of thing. So everyone's gone, but I think it's worked a little bit, yeah. It was done right around when Expo 86 was here. So that's sort of when the world spotlight was on Vancouver. And there was a lot of immigration after that. Not necessarily directly because of Expo, but there was a lot of immigration because of that. And that was one of the first sort of pillars. Before our Asian places like Richmond was built up, that was one of the first pillars, like Chinatown, downtown here, having that garden there as well. It does make me feel sort of proud to be Chinese and learn a little bit more about my culture from back home.
The more people I interviewed, the more it became clear that the gardens acted as a focal point, an almost symbolic incarnation of the fusion of the Chinese and Canadian cultures in Vancouver. I found the gardens to be equally important to Canadians, recent immigrants, and Canadian-born Chinese. The common theme of building bridges and integration came out in all my interviews, and I believe the gardens have certainly been successful in aiding these complex and lengthy transitions. The gardens are not the sole reason for the integration and bridging of cultural ties in Vancouver, and this process is by no means complete. Notwithstanding this, I think we can all agree initiatives and concepts like the Dr. Sun Yat-Sen Classical Chinese Gardens go a long way to building these bridges, and it is no surprise that similar projects have been completed in Portland and are being planned in Seattle and Minnesota. The gardens have educated Canadians, immigrants, and tourists, and I hope this documentary has likewise educated you on the importance of concepts like these in the embracing of cultures in an increasingly diverse world.